Joining us now is Patrick J. Buchanan, who's been critical of this, and he has a new story out today, earlier this week. He said Syria could consume Trump's presidency. Pat, I don't see how that happens. I mean, he's not occupying. He's not talking about boots on the ground. I would be against boots on the ground, and I think he just said this is a line that no country can cross, and that is killing women and children with chemical weapons. And by the way, I think it does vindicate those of us that believed in the lead up to the war with Iraq that those weapons were removed and brought to Syria, but that's a separate story. Why do you think this will escalate?
Well, I'm not sure it will, but I have said that he's put one foot into the Syrian civil war, and if he puts the other in, he will not get out, and it will consume his presidency. And I think that would be a mistake, because I think his earlier position, no matter how evil Assad and his friends are, Assad, the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, are winning the war, and the losers thus far are Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And if you ask me, it's just as Donald Trump said during the campaign, I think ISIS is the primary enemy. He also said, I will say this, Sean, that we are not going into Syria. He said that after the strike. We are not going into Syria, and General Mattis said it was a one-off operation. I just hope it is, because I don't think we can, I don't see any way out if we plunge into that war.
No, well, I don't want America to plunge into the war. Look, if Vietnam, 58,000 dead, and then we retreat because it becomes politicized, in Iraq and Afghanistan, 5,000 dead and many others losing their limbs and disfigured, if that, and we pull out there, we politicize that war, we don't have the stomach to see any of this through anymore anyway, through the lens of politics. But I don't see any problem with saying don't launch them again, or you're going to pay a very dear price without boots on the ground, because we have weaponry that is far superior to that of Syria, Russia, or any of these countries.
We don't want to get in a war with Russia.
No, we don't. I don't want to either. Absolutely not.
But there's a lot of other problems here. Take Afghanistan, where the Taliban are stronger than they've been since 2001. It's been 15 years. We've had huge infusions of U.S. ground troops. The Russians and the Iranians have now pretty much begun to decide that the Taliban are going to win. And they seem to be trying to work out some deal there. We've got problems with our Pakistani ally. Now, this is the first of these wars, Sean, Afghanistan, and it's in worse situation than it's ever been. And I think McMaster was over there himself, and the general there is calling for more troops there. And then you got this thing on the Korean Peninsula. Now, we didn't start this confrontation here, but I don't know that Kim Jong-un is going to back down from testing rockets and missiles, and maybe even test fire.
I think every indication is he's not going. I don't think he's going to stop. I mean, every indication he won't stop. But the only hope that I had is that it appeared that the president of China and President Trump had a very good meeting. I know for a fact they were scheduled to meet for 30, 45 minutes on two occasions, and in each case they went over 3.5 hours. So, and then China talked about making trade concessions, number one, and number two, they themselves sent back an order of coal that was sent from North Korea, sending North Korea a message, and they said they would help calm the waters with North Korea, which I also think is the art of the deal, with the president not calling them a currency manipulator.
I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, the president has indicated.
Well, they sent the coal back, so I mean, it happened.
Well, China's trade with North Korea has increased 15-fold, I think, in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And while they talk good, I mean, they could cut off oil and they could cut off trade. As McMaster said, 80% of trade in no time. But, Sean, I think you ought to take a look at whether or not North Korea, by putting the pressure on the Americans and building rockets and getting us to take a look at a possible pullback from there, whether they're not working basically in concert with the long-term objectives of China, which is to drive us out of East Asia and out of the Western Pacific back to the third chain of islands.
Yeah, well, listen, it's certainly, I think this guy is crazy enough that if there's any escalation of any type, I would anticipate this idiot would launch a nuclear weapon into South Korea, don't you think?
No, but I think I don't think he's insane. If I thought that, frankly, I think I would be in favor of taking some sort of executive.
You don't think Kim Jong-un is insane?
I think he knows what he's doing, and he's playing a very tough, hard game. But if he used a nuclear weapon on South Korea, I mean, all bets are off. His regime would be annihilated, as would he. But I think he's putting pressure on us. I think he's not afraid of a small exchange with the Americans, and I do think if you hit him, and I think, frankly, I think Congress should get back here and debate what we can do and what we should do and what the president's authorized to do. But I think if we do hit him in some way, I think you got to expect him to hit back.
You know, the danger of all of these situations, and this was the big mistake in the Clinton era. I mean, you know, the North Koreans would say, all right, give us this amount of money and we won't build nuclear weapons. And they played that game again and again and again. They got all the money, they got all the concessions, and they got the nuclear weapons. When you get nuclear weapons married to either radical Islamists, which I think will happen eventually in Iran, or, you know, crazy dictators. By the way, there's only been 105 years of human existence. You know that in North Korea, right?
Right.
Starting with the grandpa, then Kim Jong, who's mentally ill, and now this crazy chubby son of his. I mean, it's insane. You don't have a lot of options when they've got the red button in front of them.
Well, you're exactly right, and that's what Kim Jong-un, he looked at what happened to Saddam Hussein, who didn't build nuclear weapons, and he looked at Gaddafi, who made a deal with the Americans and the West to give up all of his WMD, and he found one of them hung and the other had a worse death than that. And so he has said the only thing that guarantees that the Americans don't do that to me is if I can hit their bases with a nuclear weapon, I can hit Japan with a nuclear weapon, Okinawa, Guam, and eventually the United States. That's the only country the Americans don't attack,
Pat,
are the ones with nuclear weapons.
You're a little old school, so you'll understand this phrase that my mother used to use when I was growing up. You'll rue the day. I mean, she told me that probably every day of my life growing up. Are we going to rue the day that we allow this guy to potentially get the ICBMs he's looking for that could reach the continental United States?
I think you can't let him do that. I mean, I'm not a great hawk, and I'm not anxious for a second Korean War. But if you're talking about an intercontinental ballistic missile, I don't think you can let him build up that force. And
well, there's only one way to stop it.
Now, if you use military force on him, and he thinks the Americans are coming to finish him, I mean, his medium-range nuclear missiles, and he could use them in in rockets right down along the DMZ.
It's scary.
The Korean War would be a hellish event.
There could be millions dead in South Korea, Japan. You're right. I think he would unleash everything, and then he would be annihilated, and this would go down in history as one of the worst events of the human experience. All right, we'll continue. More with Pat Buchanan on the other side. All right, as we continue with Patrick J. Buchanan, and we're discussing, I guess, what the Trump doctrine is eventually going to look like, but I think he's pretty clear. I would be very surprised in any of these circumstances if Trump wants to put boots on the ground, number one, number two, or occupy any country. I think he's focused a lot on what is domestic policy, but he's getting pulled in the direction of foreign policy, but I don't think he's going to change. I think he's so adamant that the Iraq war was a mistake from the get-go. I don't see him taking the measures that some people are wanting him to take. You know, like, I keep hearing people like John McCain and Lindsey Graham. I'm like, what are you people racing off to war for?
Well, I think they've got a lot of places they want to fight. But, you know, they were elated with the hit on Syria, not simply because of the hit itself, but because they thought this would draw us in against the Iranians, against the Russians, against Hezbollah, when our real enemy there, in my view, has always been Al-Qaeda and ISIS. I agree with you. I think Donald Trump came to the White House really prepared to focus on America first, to rebuilding U.S. manufacturing and jobs and securing the border. But I think he has, and I think you're right again, he is being drawn into these conflicts. But, Sean, I can tell you...
I don't have a problem, though, with what he did in Syria, Pat, because, look, America can't be the world's policeman. You and I agree on that. We're not going to be able to respond every time. I agree with you there. But I do think when such weapons are used against women and children, I don't have a problem with the proportional response, which is don't use them again, and if you do, you pay a heavy price. Not boots on the ground, not occupation, not all-out war, but you pay a heavy price. And I don't think Assad is going to use chemical weapons again.
Well, no, he's been, but he did fly out of that same airfield and bomb the same place he had bombed before. And I do think that, let's take North Korea. I don't think Syria is going to attack the United States because they're winning that war. But I do think if you hit North Korea, Sean, I don't think they'd hit us with nuclear weapons, but I think they would really take military action. Look, I was with Richard Nixon when they shot down our plane 100 miles off the coast in 1969, and Nixon did nothing. I mean, look at China, what they did to George W. Bush. They shot down, what was that? They crashed into that EC-29, took it to Hainan Island, forced Colin Powell to apologize twice for allegedly...
Well, who's given the president the advice to send our ships into the area?
Well, I mean, the ships into the. Well, I have no problem with the ships going into the Sea of Japan. I think what we're saying is, if you hit us, we're going to hit you back. But if we hit them first, and I don't. Here's the problem, Sean. It is. I think Kim Jong-un is determined to build the kind of weapons that can deter the United States from ever attacking him. And he wants to use that as a threat against South Korea, against Japan, against Okinawa, against Guam, and against the United States. And he wants to sit down and negotiate our withdrawal from South Korea. That's his goal. And I don't know how you stop him from that without using some kind of military action, because he hasn't been deterred yet. Now we're betting on the Chinese. But I don't know that the Chinese disagree with the goal that Kim Jong-un's got.
Well, I don't know what the Chinese... I think they have the most influence. It impacts them the most. This is their area of the world. They should be in the lead on this. There are indications that Trump and the president of China's relationship is good, and that they seem to want to get along.
Well, look, I'm not surprised, since Trump said we're not going to fool around with Taiwan. We're not going to force you out of those islets and reefs in the South China Sea. And I'll give you a much better trade deal if you work with us on Korea. Yeah. And we're not going to name you a currency manipulator. If I were Xi Jinping, they're probably toasting him in Beijing today.
All right, Pat Buchanan, thank you for being with us.